Hey there.
Hello.
Oh
How
gosh,
are you?
oh, what a delightful accent. Oh my.
Ah, that's
It's,
very kind of you. Thank you. I'm so honored to be able to chat with you, Noel Paul Stookey. It's just wonderful to have you as a guest on A Breath of Fresh Air. Thank you for your time.
oh, thank you, Sandy. Yeah, I just, I recall so fondly my visits and my family's visits to Down Under and the coincidental stops in New Zealand as well, where we even had property for a while. We were so
Ah,
serious about moving down under.
amazing. And what stopped that from happening?
Yeah. Grandchildren
Yeah,
and
yeah, they tend to do that,
proximity.
don't they?
You know,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah,
the thing was that there were two things that really attracted us about where you live. One was, and this is kind of, I doubt if you'd be able to recognize this about yourselves or your countrymen would be able to recognize, but there's something so straightforward about your dealing with life that's so refreshing because I came from a career, albeit that quite often uses analogies and and references that are obtuse in order to avoid telling the truth
yeah.
or avoid being confrontational. And it was so refreshing to come to Australia. And then, of course, there's the simpleness. The Betty and I were pursuing a simpler life at the time we made most of our visits. We had moved to the coast of Maine to a
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
farm, and so anything that had to do with farming, and New Zealand is all about
Oh, the
farming.
place, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we really enjoyed our trips there.
Oh, that's awesome. Petula Clark once told me that what she liked most about Australia was the light here. She noticed that the light was very different. I don't know if you ever noticed that.
Probably,
Yeah,
although I must say it's probably similar to the light in Maine or any deeply rural area where there's not so much industry.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I have to tell you that I've had a good listen to your latest album and it's
Oh,
just marvelous. I mean, I was too young to be a fan of yours in those very early days, I have to
yes.
admit. Although I have followed your career right through, and I'm certainly aware of what an icon you are and have been all those years. But this latest album, at 84 years of age, you're amazing. What
Oh,
drives you forward?
well, ever since I discovered folk music, which was I was in my early 20s, and realized that music, while of course it has an entertaining value, it also has an opportunity to speak to the depth of our living, uh, whether it's emotionally or whether it's politically
Yeah,
or whether it's just commenting on the things that we share or want to share. And that coupled with a spiritual rebirth in the 70s just made me more aware of the fact that to be able to speak to people about their innermost longings and through the use of poetry, because basically that's folk music opens the door to merging poetry with music. That's not to say that some of the music nowadays doesn't have poetry, but there does seem to be a greater emphasis on the enjoyment of the music rather than the
content.
ascertaining of the lyric. Yeah, the attention to the lyric.
I agree.
So, so if you ask me, what drives me, I just think that there's always an opportunity to enlarge the relationship between people, and that's what brings me to the floor.
Yeah, well, you're certainly doing that. The new album's called Fazz, Now and Then. It's a 20-track collection that seeks to infuse traditional American folk with jazzier and more colourful chords. Now, I'm not a music aficionado, so you're going to have to explain that to me. What is the style of the music here? I mean, it's beautiful, but how is it different for you? What are you intending?
I'm going to give you a short course, Sandy.
Great. Oh,
Um,
I feel so honored.
this is an A major chord. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Now here is it smoky, mysterious, sometimes magical, jazzy, a seventh cousin. You hear
Ah,
the,
yeah, I hear the difference. Yeah.
well, those differences, I really think allow for an exploration of a lyric that just the I went to the store, but if you say I went to the store, now suddenly the lyric is transposed into this, oh my gosh, what was at the store? I mean, there's a qualitative difference between the chords, and I've always loved jazz my whole life, whether it was Dave Brubeck or Illinois Jacquet at the original Jazz at the Philharmonic concerts, or Charlie Bird, who played jazz on a classical guitar.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So those chords come quite naturally and to me, but I've never had a chance to really be so eclectic with them as I have on this Fazz album. Uh, I didn't write all the material, probably wrote maybe two-thirds of the material. But even the songs like I'll Be Seeing You, which is an old classic, to be able to bring a kind of sense of, I don't know, a new way of looking at an old standard, which really, if you think about it, a lot of the folk music that we inherited is so traditional. And I always loved kind of amplifying the emotion that was contained within those songs.
Yeah. I believe it's Dave Brubeck that's responsible for the name.
Yeah, that's right. Well, touring with the quartet was because Paul Desmond introduced the three of us. We were traveling with them in the late 60s, Peter, Paul, and Mary and Dave Brubeck on the same bill for college audiences, which seemed like a really natural pairing. But as was wont in the folk tradition, let's all get on stage and do a tune together. And so we convinced, without too much difficulty, Brubeck to look at the St. Matthew's Passion rewrite that was done by Tom Glazer. You may even find it in your record collection there by Brubeck, because all men are brothers wherever men may be. So Paul Desmond was faced with the task of bringing three what he considered to be folk musicians. And I think to a jazz musician, a folk musician is like a three chord and out kind of person. So he said, "Well, I'm going to bring some people up on stage, sing a song or perform a song with us, and I don't know whether to call it Fazz or joke." And we kind of knew which he would have preferred,
And
but the
Faz
term
stuck.
Fazz stuck with me. Yeah, I thought, well, that's pretty much what I've done all my life, all my performing life.
Right. If I can just take you back to those Peter, Paul, and Mary days, of course, you were that iconic folk group that really set a whole new agenda for so many generations. How come you were called Paul then and not Noel?
Well, we had come up with several names for the group. We were thinking because we were tall and lanky. Mary was, slender and 5'10", and Peter was 6 feet. I was 6'4".
Are you still 6'4"?
No, I'm 6'3.5", or maybe quarter or what. But we were thinking of calling ourselves the Willows, but our manager said if Noel changes his name to Paul, we could call the group Peter, Paul, and Mary. Now, I don't know if you know the old folk tune. I think it's called the 10,000-Year-Old Man. It's got a verse in it that says, I was born about 10,000 years ago, and there's nothing in this world that I don't know. I saw Peter, Paul, and Moses playing Ring Around the Roses, and I'll whoop the guy that says it isn't so. So the alliteration for Peter, Paul, and was already there. But I did not want to change my name. So I very confidently said, well, I'll take it on as a middle name, never realizing the middle name was going to totally obliterate any knowledge of me, first or last, and but it's been a great history. Obviously it must be good or I wouldn't be keeping it, as
Yeah,
my
yeah,
middle.
you've been so instrumental in bringing about so much change with your music. I mean, through that incredible career that you had with those two guys, is there one moment that really shines for you that really sticks out as the seminal time?
I think probably the most public moment would be the March on Washington, uh, where Mary delivered that beautiful line to Peter and I. She took our hands and said, "You know, we are watching history," and that's a difficult step back to take from the reality of being in the circumstance. But Mary, I think because of her upbringing, both of her parents were in the newspaper business. I think she knew what was happening and its effect ultimately on the country and on the world. The beginning of the of human rights issues publicly, I think, had a large helping start from addressing the civil rights issue.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's probably the most public, knowledgeable. But I mean, there were moments in El Salvador when the three of us visited and sang for people who were being really persecuted by a United States supported junta. There were, and then there were the private, absolutely hysterical moments, like in the back of a limousine going to Vice President Lyndon Johnson's house to sing with Gene Kelly and Yves Montand and a whole bunch of other stars who had just celebrated Kennedy's second year of the presidency. Um, there are a lot of those. And then we could talk about the birth of my twin daughters, Anna and Kate, or my oldest daughter, Liz, and
Oh, I've
what
got
she.
three daughters too.
Oh, you do.
Yeah.
They're a joy to a husband. I don't know what we would have done without with a young man in the family.
I say so. It's
Yeah.
it's it's and I don't want to even try to summarize that massive career that you've had into the 20 or 30 minutes that we've got to talk about now. And thanks for sharing those memories. I wonder whether I often get told that being in the limelight um, during the years that you're on that high, everything seems to rush past so that you didn't even get to stand still and enjoy it for a minute. Was that the case for you? Do you recall a lot of it, or was it just such a flurry that when you look back on it these days, you wonder where you were in it all?
I think to a large extent, because it was so people driven, I have a better recall. I am also in the midst of trying to put together a biography.
I
And,
read that, yeah,
and once you do that, once you open that Pandora's box, you go, oh, yeah, that reminds me of
yeah,
and one thing leads to another. So I'm mostly mindful of all the wonderful things, meeting the Queen of England, all of the luxuries that have been afforded uh, entertainers like us, because we really straddled two worlds. Our music was of the people, but our lives were really quite of the stars. To be able to ride in a limo with Peter Sellers and Peter O'Toole, and
yeah,
when we were in England, and
yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. It was a challenge to keep a level head, and then to a large extent, that's why moving to the country was one of the wisest decisions that my wife and I and family ever made.
Yeah, I could imagine you would have needed a bit more sanity in those days. In those early days, and I won't dwell on them too long, I will get past it because I want to talk about the new album. But in those early days, Noel Stookey, If I Had a Hammer became an anthem for racial equality. And on that day in August 1963 on the March on Washington, you guys actually performed Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind to the amazement of everybody assembled there. But Blowin' on the Wind, as I said, was written by Bob Dylan. How did he feel about you covering the song and making it so famous?
Well, I think it was his calling card to a large extent. He hadn't really arrived yet. Uh, there's a shot of me on the Fazz album, actually, of me backstage at Lincoln Memorial, tuning up with Joni and Bobby. Um, yeah, I don't think Bob had any problem with people doing his songs. I think it was always kind of curious to him, that somebody would, well, I think he had a sense of their worth, of the worth of his songs. But the attitude that they would bring to them was kind of interesting. I mean, through everything, what the Birds did to Pete Seeger's "Turn, Turn, Turn," Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, those are versions that I think any songwriter goes, oh, yeah, I guess you could see it from that point of view too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Of all of those
Of a,
amazing,
of a point of view, I got to stop you for just a minute.
sure.
I pull out my camera because behind you, totally unbeknownst to you, oh, come on now, totally unbeknownst to you, and yet totally coincidental, so that's why I have to take a picture of it, is a picture of three umbrellas.
Oh,
You
yes, the
umbrellas?
parapluies.
That's that's hanging in our house here in Ojai.
Ah, amazing. It's a
I
great
so
print. Oh, we
it
have
is.
so much in common. I love it. Oh, so you're no longer in Maine, you're in Ojai now.
For about 4 months out of the year, we come out.
Right.
We have a
Oh, how
daughter. We have a
nice.
daughter in Los Angeles that we originally used as an excuse to come
To the West
west
Coast. Yeah.
when the snow fell,
Yeah,
but
nice.
we've enlarged it to about 5 months now. Yeah.
I'm here with one of the icons of our generation, Noel Stookey. Noel, of all of those songs that you did with Peter, Paul and Mary, is there one that's closest to your heart?
You know, Mary had a wonderful response to a question like that. She said, our songs are like children. Some behave better some days than others. So, the wonderful thing about the panorama of music that folk embraced is that its relevance to the times in which we live is continually addressed. Some of them are more relevant than others. There's a song on the Fazz album called "Fun Police," which
That's a fun one.
which which says, "Yeah, we are the fun police. Do you have a license for that smile?" It takes kind of a cheeky attitude towards the concept of enjoyment in these challenging times in which we live. And maybe it's crossed the line. I mean, maybe it's just a little too bizarre to pretend that enjoyment is illegal. But we do live in some challenging times. So to be able to nail to your point, to be able to nail down a particular tune,
Too hard.
it's very difficult. I mean, that's why some songs like "Blowing in the Wind" become classics, is because they are timeless and they do ascribe to a larger. I mean, for that matter, the wedding song is a pretty broad picture of how we are all brought together. I've been it's been kind of a personal how shall I say um, grail to try to bring love as a concept to a broader group of people who perhaps see it as a very personal thing, perhaps see it as a make believe thing, see it as a disappointing thing, see it as a very transitory thing. And for me, the challenge is to try to bring through poetry everyone's awareness that love is possibly bigger as a concept. As a matter of fact, it might be so big that it could be interpreted to be the divine. And one of the songs on the Fazz album is "Love with a Capital L,"
I love
that
that one.
that speaks to that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, this new album is certainly born out of your love and faith. Who are you aiming it at?
You.
You got me. I just love it. If I hadn't have heard of you before, I'd be a newfound fan now because it's a beautiful, soft, gentle, meaningful album. Just the kind I like.
Thank you. There are some challenging songs in it. I think Leonard's Toaster is a really peculiarly affecting tune that starts off just with a kid watching his father be disappointed in the way that the toast comes out,
Yeah.
and yet becomes so much of the child's perspective on life itself that he has to disassemble the toaster in order to be able to have a meaningful life of his own. I mean, where are you going to find a song like that? Certainly not at Super Bowl halftime.
No,
You know,
most definitely not there.
no, it's another example of how. But folk music has entered pop music. There is no question about that. It wasn't. Granted, it had, I say, more of its heyday in the late '60s and early '70s. But when pop music discovered that it could, in fact, speak to tangible concerns that we share as a world community, then I think, I mean, the music of Sting, the music of Paul Simon, the music, the band,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, there were substantial steps being taken. As a matter of fact, your very own Gary Shearston, who is no longer with us, but who wrote one of the songs on the Just Causes album that I recorded, Tom Quick, was part of that change, recognizing that. And I suppose that's what folk rock was all about.
Well, and it's all genre bending these days, isn't it? But you know what they say, everything old is new again. So I guess its purest form could make a resurgence just as easily.
I think so. I think so. Given the right voice and the right new face and the talented the talent, yes, I think you're right. It could.
Do you see anybody at the moment that can take the messages that folk music had? Is there anybody that can carry that forward currently, apart from yourself?
If you get an opportunity, go online to www.music2life.org. And there you will find at least, I mean, it's always changing, but there are at least a half dozen to a dozen contemporary singer songwriters who are addressing the concerns of today. I think part of the difficulty in answering your question is that there are so many concerns now that have been listed. Civil rights was we were pretty focused on civil rights. Then we discovered, oh, that's human rights. Oh, well, human rights includes gender rights. It includes, you know, there. So the page has opened up considerably, and yet here are these wonderful artists still writing. When I say still writing, young but involved in their communities with a passion for bringing through music a way to inform, a way to heal, in many instances, these communities. So that's my best answer.
Yeah,
Go
no,
to.
I like that, and of course that was the foundation that you started with your daughter to do exactly that, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and she has really taken it a step further, as you'll discover if you go online.
I'm definitely heading for that, and I think what a fabulous legacy for you to leave. The album that you released last year called Just Causes, if I could just touch on that for a moment, was also 15 tracks related to social concerns and issues, but all of the profits that stemmed from the sale of that album were distributed to charitable organisations. So each track actually matches a cause.
That's right. Well, to the extent that I thought that the theme matched the concern of the particular organization. Yeah, one of the difficulties is in this day and age where the income from music is so diffracted. I mean, if you sell a CD for $15 and it cost you $5 to manufacture, then it's pretty clear that the profit was $10. No problem. But when a song gets played in Singapore on Spotify and earns 0.00085 of a cent, how do you determine? So we've had to take kind of a shorthand, a way of doing it. But we're just about at the break even point now of the advance that we gave the 15 charities that were listed on. And that whole idea came from Paul Newman, the movie star, because all of his food products, he donates the profits to charity. And I thought, wow, I've already earned money from these songs. Let's just pay for the manufacturing and give the money that they earn now to the causes that represent those themes.
Which track from that album would you like us to play now?
Oh, sweet. Um, Uh, um, I don't want to, let's for sure. Why don't you play the Tom Quick thing, track that we mentioned before by Gary? It was written by Gary Shearston, who could have had a recording career in the United States, but chose, in fact, to go to England, where he had one before he returned to Australia and became an Anglican priest, as I understand.
Amazing.
Yeah, but he wrote the song Tom Quick, which is pretty self-evident about the indigenous peoples' challenges.
Lovely. Well, we'll have a listen to that one now. It's such a pleasure to be with you, Noel Stookey, chatting about all things Peter, Paul and Mary and your latest album, Fazz. Um, let's just come back to Fazz to wrap this up. You've just turned 84 years old and it's your 63rd year as a recognised activist, singer-songwriter. That's an amazing innings, as we would say in cricket terms. And you seem as passionate about it still today as you were when you first set out in your early 20s. How's that possible?
I think to a large extent it is self-rewarding. You do something that you love, you're willing to learn within that confine of how to do it better. And to learn how to love better and express that in poetry and music. I mean, what a great ongoing challenge that is. So I've just been very, very fortunate to have been encouraged, and you know, my the reckoning is not so severe. I don't have to support a $17 million house or a $35 million jet to get me there. I live on a farm in Maine when I'm not staying at a little four-room cottage on the streets of Ojai, California. I got three wonderful daughters, so I don't. It's not about acquiring. I think, and to a large extent, I think if people can give up the need to acquire. Now, granted, there's some basic needs that people have, but beyond that, we are a civilization of accumulation, it strikes me. And to be able to give it up a little bit will really ease the stress and give you your later years with a kind of joy of expectation.
You're obviously experiencing that, and I'm happy to hear at 84 years of age you're still learning. I guess that's testament to the fact that we just continue learning every single day of our lives.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
That's amazing. Um, I've you want people to be able to reflect on the words that you um, use in this on the tracks on this new album.
Sure.
How would you like the album to affect them? I mean, I know you're trying to infuse more love into to each one of us, and that's so vitally important, particularly the way in which the world